How are you, Tom?
I'm great. It's great to be here.
He's also got like an amazing Aussie accent, which I absolutely love. And Tom, I'm going to tell them a little bit more about you. So
Sure.
you can learn about him on tomcronin.com. That's where you'll see what people have said about him. You'll read about his work. What I really like about Tom, though, is the boldness of his goal. His goal to get meditation to 1 billion people. He's embraced meditation as a tool for stress management, and his experience was so profound that he was compelled to complete his teacher training in India, in Bali, in Australia, and now he does the same for people all around the world. He helps them find inner peace. His full-time project is the Stillness Project, and it's a really bold mission to get meditation out there. So in this call, we're going to be exploring some really interesting topics. Topics such as the observer, how did you put it, Tom? The
We're,
observer-created universe? What was that word you used?
yeah, we're looking through how the universe is observer dependent,
The
and that will
observer-dependent
change.
universe.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'll also be addressing things such as how do our thoughts shape our reality? What exactly is consciousness? Why is something true for someone but not true for someone else? How can we change and shift our consciousness? And finally, how can meditation help us see true conditioning? So all of these are very related to what we've been talking about in terms of models and systems. You're going to learn a new model for viewing consciousness, a new model for understanding the universe, and you're going to learn systems to help you see past conditioning, which means bad models or rules. So Tom, let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of my favorite topics, talking about the mind and consciousness. I've been meditating for 20 years, and what really drew me into meditation was that my life was just chaos. It was misery. I was suffering from extreme panic attacks. I was suffering from, uh, anxiety, insomnia, depression. My world became so full of fear, and I was so incapacitated by this imbalance, this distortion, that the concept of walking outside of my house to get on a bus, have to deal with that traffic and people and tickets, and then go to work and actually have to start to do my job at the time, which was a money broker. I was in the high finance industry trading swaps and bonds for the investment banks. And the idea of that was such an immense proposition that I just couldn't face it. My mind, my nervous system was so overwhelmed by that idea that I had to stay confined to the space of my own home where I felt safe and secure. This is what we call agoraphobia. And it's funny because you think about that was my reality. That was my reality, that the idea of walking out of that house was too overwhelming a proposition. And I was suffering from anxiety and depression. And that was my reality at one point in time. And now my reality is that I travel the world as a keynote speaker. I'm about to do a conference in Kuala Lumpur, the Merfest Festival, which is going to be amazing. I do keynote talks in Bali, in Mexico, America, run retreats around the world at wonderful exotic locations like Bali and Hawaii, teach thousands of people how to meditate. So why has my reality changed? Why do I just totally enthusiastic about walking out the front door and seeing what incredible unknown is about to happen? And it really comes back to consciousness. It really comes back to our mind. And what is fundamentally true for one person is not fundamentally true for someone else. And why is that? That's what we're going to really look at here today. If you think about you as the audience, the viewer, there was a time back in your life when you dropped your ice cream and it fell on the concrete and it started to melt, and the emotional upheaval that you had in that moment was so immense. Can you imagine, if you've ever had children, I'm sure you relate to this, is the emotional upheaval that a child has when something doesn't meet their expectation is immense.
Yeah.
And of course, as parents, we're not crying with them, and we're not feeling overwhelmed with this situation. We're not suffering with them. We just know that their consciousness has yet to develop to the point where they can see beyond this. This is not a tragedy. This is something that, it's just an ice cream, it's going to be fine. And so we pat them on the shoulder and we say, oh, poor thing, that's okay, you're going to be all right now. We don't have that same emotional response when we're 34 when we drop an ice cream, because we have a very different perspective of that situation. Our consciousness is expanded. So something as small as dropping an ice cream, there's bigger things going on in the world, and our consciousness is being able to expand beyond the point where that small incident no longer really plays a big role in our emotional reactions. Yet at 34, for a lot of humans, when, let's just say, someone that they are feeling quite drawn towards, they might have a loving relationship, and they no longer feel the same way towards them, and they put their attention on someone else. Now, for some people, the emotional upheaval that comes from that experience is quite gargantuan. There can be therapy, there can be depression, there can be even I've seen, saw a story on the news the other day where a guy threatened to throw his girlfriend over the balcony because she didn't want to be with him anymore. But for him, that was a reality. His world had contracted to such a point where that was the most valuable and most important thing, and without it, his life wasn't worth living, or certainly was close to not worth living, and he was threatening to, throw over the balcony because she didn't want to be with him. So really, this is all about how small our mind is or how big our mind is, and how big are we seeing things. And as we expand our consciousness, we start to see things in a different light. The entire world is completely observer dependent. So what's right for you, what's true for you through the veneer of your consciousness is not going to be necessarily true for someone else. Why is someone Islamic and why is someone Christian? Why is someone Buddhist? Why is someone Hindu? A lot of the way we're living our lives is a deeply conditioned process. And we have these things called memes, M-E-M-E-S. And memes is, all about cultural conditioning, social conditioning, political conditioning. And if you grew up under, a very right-wing Christian family and you continually got all that dogma programmed into you, all through your childhood, that's going to have a very big impact about the way you see the world, as these imprints are left on your consciousness. And that leaves a mold. It leaves a binding effect, like an impression. So when that coin goes into the mint and the machine presses upon that piece of metal, it leaves an imprint in it. And it's quite an indelible imprint. It is an indelible imprint. And this is what a lot of our social conditioning is. It's so strong in its impression that it leaves upon us, that it leaves a very strong binding effect on the way we see the world. And the Buddhists call these samskaras. Samskaras are the binding impact, the binding impression upon a previous experience that influences the way we see our world in the future. What we're going to talk about today is how we can break through those samskaras. We're going to have a meditation session where we're going to dissolve our consciousness beyond the limitations of these samskaras, these memes, so that we can actually see a greater reality. We can see a bigger universe. We can see beyond what's programming and what's true.
Tom, that's beautiful. I love how you explain it, and I love how you bring in so many different cultural practices into your explanation. I was particularly struck by your analogy of how a child dropping an ice cream cone is going through the same human emotional response as a man or a woman who's just been dropped by their lover. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's something that the beauty of this is that it's all malleable. There's that wonderful book by Norman Doidge, which I'm sure you may have read, The Brain That Changed Itself. The brain is malleable, and this has been scientifically proven. So this is a classic in my case. What was once an overwhelming proposition of walking out the door of my house, the observer that was experiencing that moment experience is no longer there. It's no longer an experience that I have. In fact, it was funny. I've been working on a book which has a lot of autobiographical experiences in it. And I wanted to capture a chapter on the darkest experience that I was having when I was suffering depression. I really wanted to be able to convey to the reader what I was feeling back then by trying to feel it myself. And it's fascinating because I couldn't actually get there. I wasn't able to get into that emotional state because what I'd done through 20 years of meditating is that I'd moved beyond the capacity to experience that level of depression and darkness. I couldn't really capture the true essence of what it was like because I couldn't actually feel it anymore. And that's that malleability of our consciousness that is able to shapeshift. And I see this constantly. I had a student actually email me yesterday. I kid you not, she emailed me yesterday. She'd been practicing my meditation program. She'd been suffering postnatal depression for 2 years. For 2 years since she gave birth to her child, she has been deeply, deeply depressed. And now since she's been meditating, she says, I feel alive. I feel I can live, and I feel there's a sense of hope and optimism.
Beautiful.
So that's malleability. You know, her consciousness is gone. She wakes up in the morning, and 2 weeks ago, she can only see heaviness. She can only see darkness. She can only see there's nothing to wake up to that's possibly in any way, shape, or form positive or optimistic. And yet now she wakes up and she's got hope and optimism.
And what many people need to realize is that hope, optimism, happiness are all things that are malleable. You can engineer this in your head. People simply have failed to learn the right technique. So we think it's normal to wake up in the morning, brush our teeth, put on our clothes. But we don't realize that it's abnormal to wake up with fears, anxiety, with stress, but also that these are fixable with the right tools, meditation being probably the most powerful one.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is the key to it, is that, for me, I suffered depression and anxiety for many, many years. And it wasn't really until I found the tool that was going to help me to change that reality into a different reality. And this is where meditation is key. Trying to do this on your own by just getting up and hoping that it's going to all change, it's very, very difficult. And it really is important that we find tools, and there's multiple tools out there. And even if meditation is one of those tools, there's many different meditations that we can do. And we'll do one meditation today that's a guided one, but there are different meditation techniques that we can do, and some of them are going to be possibly more effective and more potent than others. And this is the thing, is that we need to recognize firstly that something needs to change in the model. Now, whenever there's suffering, it's purely indication, and this applies to countries, it applies to planets, it applies to relationships, it applies to individuals. If there's suffering, if there's discomfort, if there is dis-ease, it's purely an indication that we are not in the flow. We're not aligned with natural law. We're not aligned with the fundamental, there's an intelligence within the cosmos. There's an intelligence within the cosmos. When we're aligned with that, our life will start to flow. There'll be harmony, there'll be joy, there'll be love, there'll be peace, and there'll be abundance. And when we don't have that, then there's an indication that something is stuck. There's friction, there's resistance, there's something that's not flowing. And we need to look into that and ask ourselves why and where. And you can look at countries where there's turmoil, and it's quite simple, that something needs to be done differently than what's being done at the moment. And I always look at my life. In fact, I just came out of the surf. I came out of the surf literally 30 minutes ago. And a guy that I hadn't seen for a long time paddled over to me and he said, "Tom, great to see you. Man, and he just unloaded all his problems about this girl that he's having these relationship issues with." So we had this nice little sort of counseling session out in the surf at the back of the waves. It was a really beautiful morning. And he was pointing his finger at this girl that had caused all this harm to him because she'd sort of put her attention elsewhere. And I said to him, what I'd like to do is not look at what she's done and where she's at. I'd like to look at you and what you weren't offering her that made her want to look somewhere else. And it's all about self-referring. I said, really, you have to ask yourself, how have you manifested this situation? And he had this massive aha moment where he realized that he'd actually engineered that situation. And then he became empowered because now he knows that there was something that he'd done to create that situation, and there's something that he can do to change that in his future reality. And this is what we can do when we have turmoil in our lives, when we have pain and suffering. We always have to look within, whether it's a country, an individual, a soccer team, you name it, and just go, what are we doing that we need to do differently than what we're doing right now so that we have a different result in the future? And for me, I'd resisted the change for a long time. There's a wonderful saying, suffering is proportional to our resistance to change, and happiness is proportional to our ability to embrace change. If we're resisting change, then we're going to start to experience suffering. Change is an evolutionary principle, and we must continually adapt and evolve. And if we're resisting that by holding on to a model that's not serving that process of evolution, then we will invite suffering. And if we got suffering, that's wonderful. We just look at our lives and say, this model needs to change because there's suffering. And that's what I did in my life. Once I changed my model, okay, cocaine, drugs, staying up till 4 a.m, 2 hours sleep, going to work as a broker for, crazy hectic, turning over billions of dollars worth of swaps and bonds. That model wasn't working. Once I changed the model, and I continued on doing the same job for many years after that, but all I did was tweak the model a little bit. Instead of the crazy partying and all that excessive stuff, I just started meditating and finding that inner calm, and then everything started to unfold naturally from there.
And your life has gone through quite a dramatic transformation. I mean, just the life you lead right now, you're touching the lives of tens of thousands of people. You, from what we just gathered, have a beach outside your home, and you just came in from the surf. And when I saw you step in front of the camera and your hair was all wet, I thought you just stepped out of the shower. I was thinking, sloppy. I was thinking, that Tom really needs to get his act together. But turns out, you just got off a surfboard. And also, I've seen you teach in some of the most amazing places in the world, like Bali and Ubud. Yet I know your history, and I know where you come from. And I think it's very inspiring to see the dream life you've created for yourself, but where you were at one point in that darkness. Tom, just before this, you were talking about samskara. I think that's a really, really important idea. And does this mean that everything in the world that changes, and as a result of that change causes us pain, is simply because we are perceiving that change through the veil of samskara?
Yes. For most people, that is true. And the way we liberate ourselves from samskara, and samskara, by the way, it's where we derive our English word scar. A lot of our English words derive from Sanskrit. If you think of samskar, so there's scar in samskara, what we have there is a scar is a blemish left on the skin from a previous experience. It's an embellishment left on the skin from a previous experience. And it can be an emotional scar. I am now having a particular behavioral pattern today based upon the way I was living in the past, based upon some experience that left an imprint on me in the past. So, classic example, my mother, she nearly drowned when she was 7. She was English and swimming in England, and she nearly drowned at a swimming carnival. And they picked her up from the bottom of the swimming pool, and it was, life and death sort of stuff. But to this day, she's never put her head underwater, 70 years later. And that is an irrational behavior based upon a conditioning from a previous experience. We all have samskaras. The way we behave, the way we talk, the way we think is really based upon these imprints that we have from our previous life and the past. That was an extreme case, but a lot of behavioral patterns are samskaras based upon experiences we have, and some of them are really relevant, like when you put your hand on a hot plate, that leaves a samskara. It's like you burn yourself, and there's a memory now that says, okay, now that was dangerous. Now I know with that samskara that putting my hand on the hot plate is not a very smart thing to do. I'm not going to do it anymore. Animals have it, humans have it, we all have it. But a lot of samskaras create great deals of limitation. And religion is one of the big ones where we get brought up with particular programming about this is who I am and that's what I've got to believe, dogma. Right. And we get so conditioned and so confined by this. It was a wonderful thing came up in the news. I have these wonderful discussions with my mum and dad. They're devout Catholics, and there was a wonderful article in the paper the other day that says this is a fascinating concept because Jesus Christ was brought up in Bethlehem, which was in like Palestine, and people had names like Mahud, and there was all these Islamic names, and yet he managed to find 12 people that were friends of his that were called Peter and John and Richard and Andrew and Thomas. It's like, that's kind of And I said to my mum, I said, have you ever thought about the fact that the disciples' names were all English? And why was that? And she's like, you know what? That is such a fascinating thing. Now, that's dogma. We'd never stopped to question why the disciples' names were all English, when in actual fact, 2,000 years ago in the place that Jesus was living, there's no way that those guys had those names. Absolutely no way, unless something really random started to happen.
Right, and Jesus' real name was Yoshua.
Of course. So somewhere along the line, I'm not sure where, but they kind of got really anglicized. I'm not sure why or how, particularly since a lot of the Bible was sort of coming out of Italy when they sort of the Council of Constantinople. So you're getting a bit off track, but this is all dogma, and we sort of get programmed to think certain things without question.
And so, for example, the idea that heartbreak, someone leaves you, heartbreak, that's programming. Because another way of viewing it is that someone leaving you is the end of a beautiful relationship where you were learning from each other, and now you're setting forth to spend some time with yourself so you can continue your cycle of growth and opening up to the possibility of meeting someone else. So again, almost a lot of things that cause us pain are not necessarily painful. We've been trained, or as the Buddhists say, we've been scarred through samskara to perceive it as pain. Would that be a correct way of putting it?
Absolutely. And you can have two people go through a breakup with someone. One couple, they break up, and then another couple break up. One person from one breakup can be going, I'm not going to go into a relationship again. It's just like when I put my hand on the hot plate, that's painful. If I commit myself and totally open my heart, then that will lead to pain. And so there's a cell memory there that says, relationships, pain, nah, not doing it anymore. And so they close their heart and they shut themselves down from going into very open, flourishing, beautiful relationships. The other person can go, you know what? That was relevant. They see what happened in a totally different light, and they say, we just didn't have unity, and it wasn't right for us to be together for the next 60 years of our life. And that was all relevant. And in some way, I actually created that myself in some ways. So they look at it from a very different perspective. And so they're able to then go, you know what, that actually taught me some wonderful lessons, so that when I go into my next relationship, I'm actually going to open myself up even more. I'm going to give more. And I'm going to invite them into my world more. I'm going to serve more, and I'm going to offer more. So we have two people going through the same situation and two very different responses based upon their consciousness and their ability to see through the samskara.
And let's go and explore the first two questions that we brought up, which is, what is consciousness, and how do our thoughts shape our reality?
It's really good. So I'll start with what is consciousness. To me, and it's very broad, so I'm only going to give you my perspective of this. So it's open to debate, and I'm sure I'm going to get some professors and lots of people come in and say, no, 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 no. And that's a wonderful thing, because it opens wonderful discussion. This is purely subjective, so it's not a rule, and it's not, something that you'll find in Wikipedia. But really, I see it as an awareness. That child's awareness of that ice cream falling on the ice, on the hot concrete and melting, is very different from its awareness at 34 years old. So they don't have the same response. Consciousness is your awareness, and that awareness can expand or contract based upon experiences that you have in life. And we can expand our consciousness. In meditation terms, in the Vedic principles, we have what we call cosmic consciousness. Cosmic consciousness, it's the fifth state of awareness, where our mind has expanded beyond the structural forms of thought, which is going to lead to our next question, what are thoughts? Our consciousness expands, because consciousness and thinking are two very different things. Thinking is like a vehicle for consciousness. But consciousness expands, awareness expands beyond the thinking level to encompass the entire cosmos and see life in a very different, expanded light. And so that's, to me, what consciousness is. And we expand consciousness. We expand consciousness in meditation as we transcend thoughts, which goes to our next question: how do thoughts shape our reality? Our mind, Descartes said in the 1600s, I think, therefore I am. I really feel some empathy for Descartes, because he obviously wasn't a meditator. Because if he was a meditator, he would have simply said, I am.
Ah, beautiful.
I'm not defined by my thinking, because my thinking pretty much is like the software in my computer. This Mac is only as good as the data that it's been put into, and that's what our thoughts are like. Our thoughts are really primarily 85% of our thoughts are considered to be recycled thoughts from the day before, the day before, and the day before. So what we think each day, 85% of what we think is pretty much the same as what we thought yesterday. I've got to brush my teeth, and what's for dinner? I've got to go to work. I'm getting the 386 bus at 7:15. We're thinking along the same lines. We're thinking the same negative or positive thoughts. And then here's the interesting thing. 85% of those thoughts that we're having day after day, they're not actually ours. They're not even ours. They're not ours as they're not impulses of intuition. They're not ours of creative intelligence. They're not ours as in some new cosmic sort of intelligence that we've tapped into in our moments of silence. They're just data that's just running through our head. And so what are thoughts? How do they shape our reality? Well, this is what our thoughts are. Our reality is really flowing from our thoughts. Every action that we've had in our day was preceded by a thought. Your hairstyle, the shirt you're wearing, the job you chose, the partner you selected, the sofa you're sitting on, the bus you're going to get. And it's all preceded by a thought. And so if your thoughts are conditioned primarily by your society, by your peers, by the way your parents spoke to you, by your religion that you were brought up with, by the political system that you're brought into, then really, what are your thoughts? And do they clearly define you? And that's where I feel Descartes might have just missed the boat a little bit on that one. And again, I might get some Descartes fans are going to email with some problems about that. But I think Therefore I Am is not a clear, defined distinction of who I am. Because I even know as a meditator, I know a lot of my thoughts still, they're not truly mine. Now, when we meditate, what happens is when we transcend in meditation, transcend means actually the mind becomes still. One would call that samadhi. When we transcend in meditation, now we have an awareness. We're still aware, we're still awake. We still have an observer. But we're no longer in the limitation of thought. We've gone beyond the limitation of thought. So think of the analogy of the ocean. The ocean is most expressed on the surface where the waves are. It's the most expressed aspect of the ocean, where we can clearly see defined components of the ocean. There's a wave, and there's a wave, and there's a wave, and there's a wave. Now that wave's bigger than that wave, and that wave's lasting a little bit longer than that one. That one hasn't got as much energy. And there's clear distinctions as to the properties of the ocean on the surface. But we know that's not the only quality of the ocean, because we know if we pierce that layer of the ocean, where there's multiple forms and there's relativity in that wave was formed because the wind and the currents and the high low pressure systems and the moon, we know that the ocean has other components to it, other characteristics. And if we go below the surface, we'll discover that there's a vastness there and there's a stillness at the base of the ocean that doesn't have those defined properties. And now we say, there's waves here, but there's ocean here. Now, the waves are actually the ocean at all times. It's just they're just having a temporary expression of the ocean.
So why is something true for someone, but not for someone else?
Again, it comes back to these samskaras or memes or dogma. And people will fight to the death for a religion, but other people won't. Why is that true for some and not for others?
So can I share a story about that?
Absolutely, I'd love to hear.
Why is something true for someone and not for someone else? So I remember one of my employees, right? He's now a very successful entrepreneur, but let's just call him K. So K was a programmer, and K was a real geek. He was great as a programmer, but he had difficulty meeting women. He just wasn't confident going up to girls to say hi. And he was attending a meditation class. This was a class called the Silva Method, and Laura Silva, whom many people in the audience are familiar with, you're familiar with her. She was teaching a class in Kuala Lumpur. Kay attended that class, and Laura said something that was really interesting. She said, well, all these things you believe about the world are nothing more than a pattern of neurons in your brain. It's not true. What happened in the past, you can't change it. It simply affected the structure, the beliefs in your brain. So what if you just decided to discard those beliefs right now, here and there? What would happen? And Kay, who was in that class, all of a sudden it occurred to him that he wasn't a geek anymore. He was simply defined himself as a geek because programmers are considered introverts, they're considered shy, they're considered to be socially inept, and he decided, I'm not going to be there. And all of a sudden, Kay's entire personality changed. I've never seen a guy transform his personality that rapidly. Now, this was 5 years ago. Kay is now dating a beautiful woman. They just got engaged. And as soon as that switch happened, he became a Casanova. He couldn't keep women away with a broomstick. He's now a successful entrepreneur, employs about a dozen people, has a beautiful office, all because he simply realized that the neurons in his brain were just arranged there at random based on, as you put it, samskara. But it's malleable, and you can shift that easily just by understanding that your past doesn't necessarily determine who you are today.
Absolutely. That's a great story. And it's so indicative of how he shapeshifted his reality based upon shapeshifting his thought.
And the question we asked at the beginning was, how can we change our consciousness? How would you answer that?
Well, the technique that I use first and foremost is meditation. I think we can do it by independently observing the mind, but even that is difficult because it's difficult to observe the mind from within the mind, which is a conditioned place. And, even for Kay, he got a trigger from an authority or a trigger from someone that said, hey, by the way, and then he had this shift. Would he have had that shift without that input? Possibly not. He might have lived for the rest of his life feeling like he's a geek and lived with that model of his thought, which shapeshifted his reality or held his reality of him being a geek and not having a partner. So for me, I find, firstly, meditation is really powerful. I find, obviously, reading books and going to seminars, going to courses, all really help. Again, they're memes. There's no question about it. They're still memes, but they're different memes, And so they're still beneficial. And what happens when we meditate is that we create a blank canvas. We kind of clean in the canvas. It's like getting, a cloth and wiping all the paint off the canvas. And it's just, okay, there's no more conditioning here. I'm going to just start with a clean canvas, and then you can create whatever you want on that canvas, and that can become your future life based upon this clear consciousness. So for me, meditation is vital to be able to transcend the dogma. What happens when we transcend in meditation is that our mind it collapses into the field. We're going to do a little meditation in a moment where we can get into the field of pure potentiality. And we know we're at this wonderful junction point in quantum physics where what ancient mystics have been experiencing and talking about for thousands of years, and quantum physics is now validating that there's this unified field. There's a realm that's non-physical that all intelligence plays within. And it's a really, really exciting for us now at this point in humanity that we're able to actually scientifically validate the texts that ancient mystics have been writing and talking about for thousands of years, that when we access this field, we become creators. And to do that, we need to, like the wave collapses in and becomes the ocean. So if you think about the sea becomes really calm, we no longer have the structures and the forms that create limitation. I'm only a wave and I'm only a geek, I can't have girls, and this is who I am, this is my shape. When the wave becomes still, it becomes part of the field. Now it's the ocean. Mm-hmm. And when we're with the ocean, we go, wow, I can manifest anything out of this. You realize you are the creator. You are empowered to basically choose and create your reality however you like to see it.
Beautiful. I love the metaphors that you bring in as your teacher. So let's get to the meditation.
Yeah, let's do some meditation.
But before that, I want you to answer one more question that we brought up at the beginning. How does meditation help us see through conditioning? And I want to ask another question. We've been talking about creation. How does meditation help us create our reality? So how does it help us see through conditioning? And how does it help us create our reality?
Yeah, so how does it help us see through conditioning? When we transcend, there's an observer there. And what a lot of my students say when they're meditating is they get these incredible creative impulses. what happens is there's a field of creative intelligence that lies at the source of everything. When we transcend our mind, think of that field of creative intelligence at the bottom of the ocean, okay, in this vast stillness. And when the mind is de-excited, no longer in the realm of conditioning and programming, we've gone beyond the thought forms, which are just limited little structures. The mind has gone beyond the little structures, and now it immerses itself in this field of infinite creative potential. The mind dips itself in that dye of stillness, of infinite creative potential. And then when the mind comes back out again, it brings with it the essence of that infinite creative intelligence within it. And it stays, lingers. And of course, we get hit with more conditioning, and we watch Fox News, and we read the paper, and we hang about the water cooler talking about gossip. And so a lot of that fades. But if we do this regularly, morning and evening, and I recommend twice a day. That's what I've been doing for 20 years. Twice a day, once in the morning for 20 minutes and once in the afternoon for 20 minutes. Using a particular style of meditation where I have a mantra or sound that allows me to transcend. Each time the mind immerses itself in that field of creative potential, and then it comes out of it. And so now what happens is that the mind becomes eventually unified and operating from that space on a daily basis. So rather than just sitting on a bus and hoping that we get a glimmer of silence so that we can get a creative impulse, we're operating from that space continually throughout the day. Now, when we operate from that space, we see those thought forms, those conditionings, there's the dogma, and we just see them as like, we observe them with a mild fascination.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that was my journey as well. The reason I developed this program, Consciousness Engineering, the reason I got into this entire industry is because I started meditation at the age of 14. And by the time I was 19, I had started questioning everything about the way the world works. I remember, just like you said, but it freed me up from the dogma. I grew up in a very religious background. By the time I was 19, I went to my parents and I said, I'm just going to give up this whole religion thing. And my parents were a little disappointed. But it was this liberating feeling that happened because with every meditation session, I would get downloads. And these downloads would lead me to question the conditioning of my time. Now, the second thing I wanted to ask you is, how does meditation lead to us being creators of our universe?
It's the impulses, these little impulses that come through. And, I'm actually just signing on a massive funding deal on our film that I'm making with Drew Herrett, director of The Secret, which is really exciting. It's called Superhuman, and it's about untapped human potential. It's an amazing film. It's really one of the most exciting, groundbreaking films going to be coming out soon in 2016. And that was just born out of an impulse that happened one day while I was driving along, and it's just, these things just bubble up from within us because we are the source of creative potential. Mm-hmm. It's just that we get in the way of it because of our limited thinking and getting stuck in that conditioned 85% of our regurgitated thought forms.
And that's so interesting because most people would answer, well, when we are meditating, we develop the ability to create our reality based on the goals that we want. But what you just said is you said impulse. Now that reminds me of the teachings from Joe Vitale. He wrote a book called Zero Limits. Great book, right? But one of the interesting things he speaks about in that book is intention versus inspiration. He says that at a certain level of functioning, you no longer are setting your own goals. They are not coming from you consciously. You are a vessel for the universe to achieve the universe's goals. And so it's not intention. You think you want to start that company. You think you want to go and find the love of your life, but it's not. It's inspiration flowing from you. Mm-hmm. And that inspiration then is pulling you into certain directions. But that inspiration is coming from the universe. What you said is very aligned with what Joe Vitale teaches. And for those of you listening, Joe Vitale is going to be another guest that we're hoping to bring on soon. But it's a very interesting concept. So what you said is quite different from what many others will say. But I like what you said. And whether it's intention or inspiration, it doesn't really matter. The thing is, it's an idea of a new world that you want to create, Whether it's coming through you or coming from you doesn't really matter. The point is, you now have that vision, and that vision helps you go out there, whether it's through law of attraction or reticular activating system, to go out there and create that reality.
Yeah. One thing I want to add to that, which is really profound and really supportive of what I'm about to say, is that when one becomes fulfilled, they feel and their needs are fulfilled. What they then experience are the needs of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Mother Teresa is a classic example of that. Her needs were complete. She didn't run around, I need someone to love me, please someone love me. She's just like, I am loved.
Right.
And who wants it? She felt the need of the time and she went to serve. And this is a beautiful thing is that, a lamppost is most used, or most effective, I should say. A lamppost is most effective in dark places because it experiences the need of the time. And what meditation does is that it opens up the light that we already are within us by removing the layers that are blocking the light. And when the light is shining bright, it feels naturally more effective in the darker places.
Right.
So it goes towards where it can serve and offer its light. And that's where the impulses come. A movie would be a great way to shine the light on people's lives and let them know about this, this, and this, or doing an online meditation program, or doing a Skype with Vision. These are great ways to share what I've discovered in my journey of 20 years. Now it's time to share that with other people.
Beautiful. So Tom, let's get to the meditation.
Sure, let's do that. All right, so let's everyone closing our eyes. And what we'll do is we're going to take one deep breath, filling up our lungs and down into our abdomen, and then expelling that air. From here, we're going to draw our attention to our feet, observing our feet wherever they may be, just placing our attention on our feet. Now we will move our attention to our knees. Placing our attention on our knees. Now we will place our attention on our hips, observing our hips. Now we will bring our awareness to our chest, our rib cage expanding with our breath. Observe how your ribs expand with your breath. And now observing our right shoulder. Our right elbow. Our right hand. Our left shoulder. Our left elbow. Our left hand. Placing the awareness on your throat as the air moves through your throat. Bringing the awareness to the nostrils. Observing the air moving in and out of your nostrils. The air ebbs in and out, cooling the skin around the rim of the nostrils. As the mind wanders, bring it back to this central point as the air moves in and out of your nostril. The mind is quietening. Your body is quietening. And now the mind is dissolving the boundaries of the limited thoughts. The structures of your programming are melting away. Feeling your mind expanding into a spaciousness, into a vastness. The structures of your mind are dissolving, and there's a vastness, a spaciousness, a boundarylessness. There is nothing to hold on to. There is nothing to define you. No future, no past. Just a beautiful, vast, boundaryless spaciousness. Feeling the mind expand like the waves melting into the ocean. Just a field, a vast open field. This is an expansive field with no limitation. There's no boundary. There's no form. This is you, your field, the field. This is the expansiveness of your consciousness. It's pure, it's unconditioned, it's free. There are no limitations in this. There are no forms, no structures. An endless, vast field of creative potential. Your mind has dissolved and faded and become one with. This is you, the infinite creative potential that gives birth out of the field. And now, coming back into our breath, observing it move in and out of the nostrils There's a very gentle flow of our life force. Coming back into the body, observing the ribs moving in and out, expanding and contracting with the breath. Feeling your toes grounded in the earth. And then let's slowly open our eyes. So that we have the ability to dip our mind in the field of creative potential, liberating yourself from those confines and limitations of programmed thoughts. And when we have meditation as a daily practice, our mind will continually immerse itself in that field and come out, and it'll be more and more flavored with that essence, that potential. And your life will start to become beautiful impulses of creative intelligence.
That's beautiful. I feel like I just popped back into reality. That was really deep and profound, and the gorgeous Australian accent definitely helps. What we'll do is we'll, just below this video, if you're listening, we will put that meditation segment as well. So those of you who want to listen to it again can just go straight to it. And Tom, thank you so much for that wonderful session and all the amazing wisdom you shared with us today. It's been a great pleasure. And for those of you who want to learn more from Tom, or would like to attend some of Tom's classes, where do you do your classes, Tom?
They can go to stillnessproject.com. So
okay.
stillnessproject.com has everything that they need to find out about there.
Awesome. So visit stillnessproject.com and you'll learn everything you want to know about Tom Cronin and his wonderful work. Thank you, Tom.
It's a pleasure. It's great to be here. Thanks for wonderful questions, and it's always a pleasure to enjoy and share things like this.
Thanks.